Hi everybody, my name is Andrea Behrman and this is the Learning Bear Podcast, your source for wild professional development. Today's discussion is going to be about electricity. There are a lot of vocabulary words that I want to make you aware of when you're talking about electricity as well as energy, and so we're going to cover those. Bear with me, we'll get to the good stuff. But I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So, renewable resources versus non-renewable resources. Non-renewable resources are ones that are available in a finite quantity. Perfect example, I'm sure you've heard it a million times, are fossil fuels. It took millions of years for those fossil fuels to get here. It's going to take millions of years more for them to be available again. So once they're gone for another million years. So if we use them all up, that's it. Then renewable resources are resources that are essentially available in an infinite quantity, but there's a caveat. They have to be used in a sustainable, efficient manner. We cannot overconsume them just for the sake of overconsuming. We have to exhibit some self-control. It's like when you have a whole cake in front of you, or whatever your guilty pleasure is, maybe it's crackers or cheese, I don't know, whatever. You can't eat the whole cake, okay? Because then there's not going to be any more cake. So if you cut it up and you portion it out so you have one delicious slice of cake every day for, say, a week or 10 days, whatever, then you're using your cake sustainably, right? You're enjoying it longer. Where if you ate that cake all in one sitting, well, then the next day you're probably going to want another cake. Where you could have just portioned it, rationed it, essentially, and used it over the period of a week or 10 days or however big your cake is. I don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is using it sustainably, not consuming it all at once without any sort of self-control. Not to mention you're going to feel super sick if you consume an entire cake. So then there's some other vocabulary that are directly related to electricity. And you're probably going to think, after I tell you about these vocab words, that what in the heck does this have to do with trees? What does this have to do with nature? Bear with me. I will shed light on that, I promise. But I had to teach electricity for our class, for my science class, and we had already been talking about trees, and I use nature as much as I can. And I felt like connecting these terms to a nature concept that we had already covered would make it much easier for them to understand. Okay, so first word to talk about is a conductor. A conductor is a material that allows electrons to move freely. Example would be metal. Okay, you don't want to touch metal. Like the old example is holding, a metal rod out in a lightning storm or a thunderstorm. Okay, you're gonna get electrocuted. Yeah, because the electrons can move freely through that metal and into your body. And our bodies are mostly made of water, which is another conductor. Okay. Then there are insulators, which holds electrons tightly to their individual nuclei, so they can't move as freely. Example would be rubber and glass. Okay, they stop it. That was me slapping my hands together. Sorry. The electricity comes to those materials and it stops because the materials don't allow those electrons to move wherever they want. Okay, it's like conductors are like parents of dogs or kids that kind of let them do whatever they want, free range. And insulators are those more strict parents with rules and regulations and boundaries. Okay, same sort of thing. Insulators don't let their kids go wherever they want. Conductors kind of just let them do whatever they want. Whether that's good or bad is your own opinion, but that's a really good example. Then there's two kinds of current. There's alternating current, which reverses direction at a regular rate. Then there's direct current, which only flows in one direction. Okay, those two terms are kind of obvious from their labels. Current is the flow of electrons, When we think about currents, we kind of think about water, I think, a lot, like in rivers or in the ocean. And the current is how the water flows. Maybe it'll spin around in one area, maybe it'll veer off in another direction, whatever. That current is the flow of electrons or the flow of water, etc. Then there's load, which is a device that consumes energy or power. Now this could be as simple as your cell phone or an alarm clock or a microwave, whatever. It could also be animals, okay? They're consuming plants. They're consuming the energy from the plants, and then, you might consume the animal down the road. We are a load in that we consume energy from plants and animals and etc. Okay? Then there's power, which is the rate at which energy is delivered to something. It's usually measured in watts, and the formula for it is quantity divided by time. Then we have voltage, which is the force that moves electrons. Okay, this is not from Star Wars. So with rivers, force that moves the water downriver is sometimes it can be gravity, like in a waterfall situation. In the ocean, the currents happen with temperature differences. So there's lots of different ways you could explain voltage if you were trying to connect it to nature. Just got to think about it a little bit. And then the last thing is watt, which is the amount of power expended when 1 amp of DC flow goes through a resistance of 1 ohm. Okay, so that deals with Ohm's law, and you're going to need to talk to somebody smarter than me that can effectively explain it to you, or just watch a YouTube video. But you know watts because of light bulbs, if for no other reason than that alone. 60 watt light bulb, 70 watt light bulb, 100 watt light bulb, whatever. They all have that number and then W. The W means watts. So, again, what does this have to do with nature? Well, I do not have the money to purchase a bunch of fancy equipment or supplies that can demonstrate these concepts for students, these electrical words. So what I like to do is try to figure out a way to use what I have. I try to use my resources in a sustainable way. If ultimately I have to buy something, I will, but I found a way to explain these terms without having to buy anything. Several years ago, I took a project learning tree workshop, and we were given tree cookies. And a tree cookie is not a cookie shaped like a tree, for the record. It is a horizontal slice of a tree, and it includes the bark, the rings, the whole cross section. In my tree cookie, it has the bark on the outside, a nice thick bark, and then it has different shades of the inner portion. Okay, the inner portion is made up of the heartwood, the sapwood, and the cambium, and those are all kind of a different color. So the heartwood is just hardened sapwood. It's old sapwood from when the tree is very young. And my tree cookie actually did not have the heartwood. It just had the sapwood, the cambium, and the bark, which is perfectly fine for this example. So as we go back through the vocab we just talked about, I'm going to relate it to that tree cookie. So imagine what a tree cookie looks like. I'm sure you've probably all seen one. And that's where we're going to go with this. So the conductor, remember, is something that allows the electrons to move freely. And in this situation, it is the cambium. The cambium is where the growth occurs in the tree. And so it allows the tree to move freely in this upward and outward direction each year as the tree decides, kind of deems fit how it's going to spend its energy that year. Then there's insulator. That is the bark. Okay. Now the cambium allows the cells to move and grow within that cylindrical shape. The insulator, the bark, keeps it from bursting out into a square, and it also keeps things out. It keeps predators out, of course, which can be a current that you don't want. It protects the tree. It keeps everything contained. Okay. Then the sapwood, which is the center part of the tree cookie, that is the DC current. It moves the water up the tree in one direction. It doesn't reverse directions. The water goes up all the way up to the top of the tree, goes out to all the branches, and is transpired through the leaves. Okay. The AC current, now think about a typical, maple tree, for example, or an oak tree. What do they do at a regular rate every year? What happens every year to those sorts of trees? Ta-da! They lose their leaves, right? So at a regular rate, they reverse direction. They come out with all their pretty leaves in one direction, and then at a regular rate, they drop all their leaves and they go into hibernation. Goes out, goes in regularly every year, about the same time. Then the load is the tree itself. We discussed how humans are a load because we consume energy and we consume power, mostly energy, sun's energy or plant energy, whatever, biomass. Trees do the same thing. They consume energy. Then voltage is the force that moves electrons. So this would be the water and the roots. The roots are sucking the water up. Okay, there's a force that pulls those electrons, that water along. The power is the water consumption. Okay, some trees consume hundreds of thousands of gallons of water every day. That is their power, the rate at which the energy is delivered throughout the tree. And then finally, the watts is the amount of power expended with the DC flow and the ohms and whatever. So the watts would be the number of leaves. It could be the number of seeds or acorns or pine cones, or the years of growth. It could be a number of things. It depends on how you want to spin it. Okay. So if you imagine a tree cookie telling you all these things, you can save a lot of money, honestly. And if you're already talking about trees and nature, they already kind of probably know the concepts of these trees, about bark and the cambium and the sapwood and all these other things. So now you're connecting them to, you're transferring that information to a different situation and becoming more general. And that's a really good way to learn. So moving away from electricity just a little bit, we're going to focus more on energy and less on power. So there are several different forms of renewable energy, and in Project Learning Trees manual, they talk about that a lot in the energy sleuth activity, which is activity 39. And they also talk about non-renewable energy sources like fossil fuels and oil. I didn't really want to talk about that because we have been focusing on renewable resources, so I stayed more on the renewable resources side. So that's what I'm going to talk about to you. So biomass is a fuel derived from plant or animal material. So you can burn wood, you can burn plants, you can burn cow muffins, meadow muffins, which is just poop, by the way. And so those carbohydrates turn into energy. Okay, my father-in-law burns wood for most of their heat source during the winter. He collects dead trees in his woods, he chops it up, he throws it in the basement, they have their wood burning oven, and unless it is critically in the negatives for an extended period of time, that biomass is almost entirely what they heat their house on. Then there's hydropower, which is, hydro means water. So it means generating energy through the movement of water. This is when they have dams and the force of that water is pushing on the dam and turning a turbine, and then they have energy. There's solar energy, which, energy comes from the sun. You need solar cells and solar panels in order to convert that energy to electricity. It's a very popular form, and it's pretty inexpensive. The solar panels pay for themselves very quickly. Wind energy is a complicated process, but they have wind turbines. They're very popular in the Midwest. These big, huge windmills, essentially, and they only have like 3 forks though, and the wind turns them, and somehow that's turned into electricity. There's a electric company from where I'm from that has a huge amount of wind turbines, and they're a large source of their power. How they pay, or not pay, how they support their customers' needs is usually through wind energy, which is pretty cool. Geothermal is another form of energy that I think is pretty cool. I don't really know how often it's used, but I think it's pretty neat. Geo means earth and thermal means heat. So it's heat coming from deep within the earth's crust and core. There's steam that comes up from when the wet rocks are exposed to heat. The steam comes up, and that can power cities or buildings, electricity, etc. They also talk about hydrogen power, and they also talk about energy, ocean energy, which I didn't talk quite as much about, but they are very interesting forms of renewable energy. So there's a lot of different ways you can spin how you would use energy, and I took inspiration from the energy sleuth lesson and turned it into a superhero sort of situation. They talk about in the lesson about superheroes and where do superheroes get their energy from. And we talked about that in the class that I taught, and they really got on board with that. And they seem to kind of know where that comes from, kind of knew where their superpowers come from. So I sort of took it a step further. Everybody was assigned a couple different renewable energy sources, and there's information in the Project Learning Tree manual that you can copy off from their website or from the book and give to your students. So I gave my students each a couple different options. They had to read through it, and then they had to develop their superhero based on one of the 2 energy sources they were given. And in addition to that, so in part B of the assignment, of the Energy Sleuth assignment, they had to answer a bunch of questions and report back to the class. Well, we took those questions and turned it into a backstory for our superhero. So the questions they talk about are the availability of the resource, technology for extracting and processing it, the economic potential, pros and cons, environmental and social impacts, the history of its use, which could very much be the backstory of your superhero, and then sustainability and potential as a future energy source for various countries. So if you think about the mass numbers of superheroes that are in our culture right now, what technology does, say, Iron Man need in order to get his power? Okay, how can he extract or process an energy to turn into power for him? Okay, then there's, and same with that goes with Batman. Okay, he doesn't have any, neither does Iron Man, doesn't have any innate superpowers like Thor or the Hulk. So he has to use technology in order to do that. Is that a sustainable process? Is it feasible? Okay, those guys were rich, and so it was feasible for them. Spider-Man was not rich. He was just a young kid. So he had to kind of make it feasible for him. He had to adapt. Then the pros and cons, which was environmental and social. Again, coming back to Batman, in one of the renditions of Batman, he's trying to figure out if Gotham really needs him anymore. Is this the right thing for him to do, both for the city, for himself, for his family, for his friends? And so he was weighing all these different impacts and consequences of being Batman or not being Batman. And so that's where your superhero extrapolation can come in. And then the history of its use, you can talk about how Thor got his power, or how Batman fell into this, profession, if you will. How did they become inspired by ocean energy? Did they have an accident? Aquaman he channels the ocean energy. How does that work? Why is he connected to the ocean? Talk about those things. And then sustainability and future resources for countries to power their cities. Again, just building. You're building a story. And in the process of having kind of this fun, lighthearted talk about it in regards to superheroes, you're also getting them to learn about, is it sustainable to talk about hydrogen energy? Is it sustainable to talk about geothermal energy? What are the pros? What are the cons? They're talking about it through the voice of their superhero, but they're actually explaining these deep concepts. And it turned out really well. I know that's not really what PLT had in mind when you read through their lesson, but it worked out really well for me, and I think it would work out for a lot of other teachers too. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that ever thought of that. So if you've already done that, then kudos to you. So that's all I really wanted to tell you about electricity. I hope you enjoyed connecting those electrical concepts to tree cookies, and also maybe gave you a new idea for how to talk about energy to your students. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at learningbearpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Project Learning Tree for having this awesome lesson in your manual. If you want to have a Project Learning Tree workshop at your school, get on their website, plt.org, or contact me and I can help you get in that direction. If you have any other questions, let me know. Have a great day. Bye.